Hello, local colleagues. Welcome back. The California Climate and Energy Collaborative team is really pleased to welcome you back for our now 19th meeting of the Local Energy Resources Network. You'll notice today my background is featuring another bloom, this time from the lower eastern Sierras and pretty close to Mammoth. So things are continuing to be beautiful around the state. I want to encourage you all to introduce yourself over the chat. Tell us who you are and tell us what beautiful part of the state you're from. And actually, if you want to tell us more, tell us if you're dealing with any snow melt. It's been pretty exciting around my neck of the woods, seeing creeks actually flowing. So as always, we really love if you would turn on your webcam if you're comfortable doing so. And with that, let me go ahead and get to our next slide and I'll introduce myself. I'm Angie Hacker. I'm the CEC Statewide Best Practices Coordinator, joined today by other members of the CEC team, including John and Tila, who are going to say hi over chat, and you're going to see them busily throwing links for you in the chat to make things easier to follow. As always, these resources that we're going to share today and all the links are going to be available afterwards, so you don't have to be frenzied in trying to take notes. As you know, if you've been here before, we share a lot of information. These 1-hour meetings are designed to provide a space for local governments and those that work with them to dive in on programs and opportunities that can help them advance their energy and climate goals. So while you're out there super busy these days doing the work, come here, get briefed on the most applicable opportunities. And today is another opportunity to do that. Today we're excited to be joined by a couple of featured speakers. We are going to be joined first by Tina Hendrix over at Willdan, and she's going to talk about a program called CEDA, which is available statewide. And then our featured presentation today is going to be with Andrea Denny at the EPA. So we are going to hear about all of the stuff that EPA has to offer local governments and their partners. We'll have a short BPC, a little closing, and today is our first time trying out this added 15 minutes. So you might have seen we've stolen an extra 15 minutes out of your life in the calendar invite. I want to encourage you, if you have something that you would like to discuss in the bonus breakout, which is what we're calling it, this extended informal 15 minutes. So say you have a topic or an update, an announcement, something you want to dive in with your colleagues, your other Learn Network colleagues, you can just throw something in the chat and say, here's, I have a recommendation for a bonus breakout. Or be thinking while we talk, and we'll have a chance to talk about it after noon when we start that bonus breakout time. Okay, so bear with us as we experiment and see what we can do to make that really valuable for you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's the updates for this month. Please be sure also, as I'm talking and sharing what I know, to please add other opportunities that you're aware of to the chat that will help your fellow peers around the state. So as always, this slide deck isn't beautiful, but it is a hyperlinked cheat sheet, so you can dive in further when you receive it afterwards. One thing I want to do is remind you that we have this need and have board. It's an informal way for you to flag interest in partnerships between jurisdictions or service providers. So if you have a need or you have something to offer, my team's going to put that link in the chat. It's a mural board. You can just drop a post-it, something short. I need a collaborator. I have this RFP out. I have this program available. Or I have this service. So please feel free to go ahead and add something to the need have board. So as you know, we always track all the way from policy to NOFA because policy drives investment. And we try to give you a heads up on opportunities that are coming as far out as we can see them. And in the policy environment over on the left, the one thing I kind of wanted to share with you was just this week, we're waiting for Governor Newsom's May revise to the state budget. We talked about that a little bit last time. There's updated revenue projections, which are sort of a mixed bag and not still altogether encouraging. So we're waiting to see if some of us that have gotten together and were successful in discouraging planned cuts to climate provisions. So that's expected this week. And other news on the policy front is SB 511. You may remember last month we talked about it. This is a bill co-sponsored by CivicWell and the County of Contra Costa to create local GHG inventories. And the good news is that it received unanimous bipartisan approval from the Senate Environmental Quality Committee Next hurdle is going to the Appropriations Committee this month. And if you're interested in signing on with your support, you can do that at the link that we're going to provide. So all of the opportunities there in the middle are either active or coming, and they are sort of ordered by due date. So the few I want to highlight today, we don't get to highlight all of them. And in fact, a lot of the EPA ones you're going to hear about from our speaker, but I wanted to make sure you were aware, if you're one of those jurisdictions that was eligible for the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, Formula Grant, I wanted you to know that they extended the deadline for the pre-award info sheet, which was originally due last month. Now it's not due until July 31st. So you have more time. And as we discussed last month, the DOE is offering technical assistance, like very extensive technical assistance for this program to help you apply. So we have a link here to the TA website. And if you weren't eligible for a formula grant, but you can actually, you're eligible to try for a competitive grant. So there's about $8.8 million in the EECBG program for competitive grants. And it just went live recently. There's a concept paper due June 5th. And so proposals for both formula and competitive grants span a wide range of topics, including electric transportation, renewable energy, building efficiency, or electrification. And I don't know if you remember what we brought DOE to talk about this. We brought them here to talk about it with us. And one of the things everybody was suggesting about the EECBG program was to consider cross-jurisdictional collaboration. And what's exciting is in their program guidelines and their NOFA, you can see that for the competitive grant, they are encouraging entities to team up on a single application. And the intent of that is to ease the burden on smaller jurisdictions and to maximize the impact of proposed projects and programs. So I would really love to see a bunch of smaller jurisdictions here in California get together. So if you are thinking of applying for the competitive grant and are looking for partner jurisdictions, that would be a really good thing to add to the need have board. Or if you want to hang around after noon and request a bonus breakout, we could even discuss that. All right. I did want to mention that there's some movement on the OPR's Regional Resilience Planning and Implementation Grant. We've been tracking this one. I recently learned that it's expected to go live. The applications will go live June 13th. There's a lot in here, even for folks that aren't adaptation, you know, we're specifically working on adaptation or resilience, things like power shutoff plans. You can do a lot with this grant, and looks like you can always already put together an intent to apply and request for help surveys, so you can kind of flag your interest, and you can also ask for help and support in preparing for this grant and seeing if your concept will be a good match. The other one that's new here that's highlighted, I wanted to make sure we're highlighting some transportation programs. So out of the DOT is something called Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation Grants, SMART grants. $100 million for that program out of the, the infrastructure law. And just to give you an idea of what it can do, in 2022, I saw that LA, San Jose, San Francisco were awarded up to $2 million to create a digital curb inventory to improve curb lane management. Orange County and Santa Clara Valley were awarded to implement transit signal priority systems. So this is one that you might want to send over to your transportation folks and let them know that applications are going to go live this summer. The other thing I wanted to mention quickly is just some input opportunities we've been talking about. So we have been working really closely with the CEC on some engagement opportunities. So two things. On May 17th, there's going to be a statewide staff workshop on the draft Equitable Building Decarb Direct Install program. So they're looking for feedback, and you'll learn more about the program. And then besides that, we are working regionally to try to bring together some regional workshops with the CEC on the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program and possibly the Home Energy Rebate Program as well. So more to come on that, but they're coming pretty quickly. So we'll be doing some outreach. The other thing we're doing some active outreach around right now is a listening session that we're conducting directly with CARB. And that's going to be specifically on barriers to local climate action planning. It's scheduled for May 24th. We've been doing some targeted outreach. But if you're a person, a local government staff member that has pretty deep experience working on climate action plans, we want you to join us and help us deconstruct the experience that local governments are having and what barriers they're experiencing, what we could try to do with the state to try to overcome some of these barriers. And then finally, the Berkeley decision was a big deal since we last met. Berkeley gas ban decision. There was a Ninth Circuit court ruling. I know a lot of people are trying to get their heads around. I wanted to just point you in the direction of some organizations that are trying to help local governments get their heads around it. So BayREN has produced an information sheet that we're going to link here so that you can kind of get the quick Cliff Notes version of what you need to know. And the other thing is that Green Cities is organizing a call on May 17th around this Berkeley decision. And we just wanted to encourage you, if you're interested, to email brandy@greencitiescalifornia.org. And we'll drop all of that in the chat. So hopefully you were able to throw some stuff in the chat as well, if you're aware of any other opportunities that your fellow peers around the state would benefit from knowing about. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so I want to introduce our first speaker, and we're really pleased that Tina Hendrix with Willdan has joined us today. She's the outreach lead, and she is going to talk to us about a program that Willdan is the implementer for called CEDA. And while she is speaking, I just want to encourage you to add your questions for Tina in the chat. So go ahead and take it away, Tina. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks, Angie. Thanks so much for inviting me to join today. And thank you, everybody, for your time. I'm just really excited to tell you all a little bit more about the California Energy Design Assistance Program, also known as CEDA. It is a program, it's actually a statewide new construction and major renovation program that is administered by PG&E and implemented by Willdan, our company. And we really want to promote electrification and decarbonization of these new projects and major renovation projects. We also have a big goal in California to electrify a lot of projects. And so CEDA, that's really our main goal, is to collaborate with project teams, help to reduce that energy demand and consumption, and also ultimately reduce carbon emissions. We service many different areas. So we work within commercial buildings, public buildings, high-rise multifamily buildings, industrial, ag, and then we work within the 4 investor-owned utility service territories. So if you've got a project within the PG&E territory, SoCal Edison, SoCal Gas, or the San Diego Gas and Electric service territory, definitely check out CEDA and see what we can do to help with your project. If you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thanks so much. So what do you get with CEDA? We offer complimentary whole building energy modeling. So it's getting another pair of eyes on your project to see the what ifs. What if we went all electric? What would that look like in terms of our energy use, our incentives? We really take a look and evaluate these different options, energy efficiency options. So we look at things like lighting, the HVAC, and also the building envelope. And we will factor in energy costs. We'll look at paybacks. We essentially put together what we call 3 energy bundles to kind of give you an idea of a good, better, and best model for your project. Completely complimentary to participate in CEDA, and also no obligation. So if you say, hey, the project's put on hold, we're not going to do it at this point, we close it out. And so there's absolutely no risk to having us take a look. But the benefits are fantastic. Getting that whole building energy modeling, having another pair of eyes taking a look at it, and then ultimately the incentives are a nice cherry on the top in addition to that energy savings that you would see year after year on your project. So again, it's a little more to it than this. This is kind of the nutshell version of it, if you will, but I'm happy to answer any questions, talk about any projects that you may have. Last thing I wanted to mention is you may be familiar with a former program called Savings by Design, and CEDA actually took over for Savings by Design about, well, coming up on 2 years ago. August will be 2 years that the program's been around. So a much better program than the Savings by Design, a more robust program. And we're just super excited about it. We've helped out quite a few projects over the last 1.5 years, and we'd love to help you with yours as well. So again, thank you for allowing me the time to tell you a little bit about CEDA, the California Energy Design Assistance Program. I'll also put the link in the chat for our portal. If you have any projects that you'd like us to take a look at, please go ahead and get them into our queue, and we'll be happy to take a look at them for you.
What a good opportunity. I do hear from a lot of local governments that this is something really needed. So we hope you take advantage of it. I do see a question here in the chat. So
Okay.
Carrie Whitlock, she is asking, does CEDA work in areas where PG&E is the only gas provider but does not provide electric? We have SMETA as our electrical, PG&E provides only gas. Is this program still available for us, or is it only in areas where PG&E provides electrical as well?
Exactly. It's only where PG&E provides electrical as well, because that's really the lion's share of what's being pulled from the grid is the electricity. So it does have to be within the PG&E service territory. It can be a CCEC community choice aggregator that gets their power from PG&E. The real key for us is wherever the project is or will be, if it's a new construction, if it's a renovation, you must be paying something called the PPP, Public Purpose Program Surcharge. That's not because you're participating in CEDA, that's actually a surcharge that's already funded as a ratepayer. That bucket of money is actually what funds the CEDA program. So yes, you do have to be in the PG&E service territory for electric.
Okay, thank you, Tina. And another question here from Kay McKean, is CEDA working at all with the SGIP program?
I'm not familiar with it, but I can certainly look into it.
Self-generation improvement program, right? This is out of the PUCs, supporting things like their storage incentives and things like that now. But yeah, take a look and look into that, and maybe you can let us know.
I will. I'll definitely talk to my project team about it.
Incentive program, thank you. Yes, that's what it is. Okay, one more question here from the chat.
Sure.
Let's see, does this include solar projects?
We definitely get a lot of projects that involve rooftop solar and carports and EV charging and all things like that. But what CEDA will incentivize for are things that pull from the grid. So yes, but not in the traditional sense.
Okay, what do we have one more minute or so, and I just wondered, do you want to provide any sort of flavor for us? And can you tell us how this has worked with local governments in the past? Kind of give us
yeah, absolutely.
Like, what did this do for a local government? Like an example.
So we have worked with quite a few cities that have had projects, whether it's a public library. Gosh, I'm trying to think of some of the others that we've done. It can be a correctional facility. I mean, any kind of a county project, municipal project. And we have done energy design assistance for, gosh, many years, probably 20 years. And we actually run a lot of different programs in a lot of different states for a lot of different utilities. So I have examples of all kinds of projects that I can share. The project name would be taken off, client name, customer name would be taken off for confidentiality, but you could definitely take a look and see a project that we've done and kind of what those energy bundles look like, what the incentives look like, what the things are that we look at during the process. So we definitely have lots of examples that we can share. We've done a whole lot of municipal public type projects.
Well, thank you, Tina. And actually, if you wouldn't mind dropping a chat or dropping a link in the chat, that would be fantastic. And Tina has said she can hang around. So if there's other questions for her, you can throw something in the chat or chat her directly. And so thanks, Tina, so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Angie. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So next up, our featured speaker, and we're just really pleased to have EPA joining us for the first time. We reached out because, I mean, I don't know if you feel the same way, but there's so much coming out from the EPA right now that's right in our court. And so it's more than ever, more energy and climate support for local governments than I've seen, at least as long as I've been looking. So Andrea Denny is here today. She's the lead environmental policy analyst at the EPA. We're just really pleased that she's going to give us an overview of all the types of resources and opportunities that EPA has to offer these days. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll We'll leave it to you. We'll go ahead and take questions again at the end, so feel free to continue to drop those into the chat. Thanks, Andrea.
Great, thanks so much, Angie. You can go ahead to the next slide. So I'm just going to start out by talking about just a few of the EPA IRA funding programs. There are other ones as well, and at the end of my remarks, I'll drop some links in the chat where you can access all of this information. But I just want to highlight the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the Environmental and Climate Justice Grants, and then the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants. And then I'm going to switch gears a little bit and just talk about some of the tools and technical resources the program that I'm in, the State and Local Climate and Energy Program, has aimed at local government. So next slide, please. So just wanted to start by, I can't claim credit for this slide, but I really like this slide because it kind of puts all the pieces together of the different funding streams that EPA has. So really starting with, in the top right corner, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, which is a two-phase planning and implementation grant program. So that is going to really look at climate planning broadly and implementation of those climate plans and really build on these other funding streams that are on this slide. So in addition to that top-down climate planning and implementation, you have these sector-based programs, like some of our mobile source programs, many of which were pre-existing but have really gotten a nice top-up of funding from IRA and from the infrastructure bill. We also have some sector-based programs looking at air pollution, air monitoring, as well as a huge investment in methane emissions reductions. And then we have the bottom-up environmental justice programs. And there's about $3 billion or so that was in the Inflation Reduction Act for environmental justice programs getting split up to a number of different grant programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about those as well. But all of these kind of fit together, and thinking about how to leverage and braid these programs is a really interesting opportunity that's coming out of EPA right now. Next slide. So I want to start with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and there isn't a whole lot I can say about this quite yet. They haven't published their notice of funding opportunity yet. That's going to come out this summer, and I don't work specifically on this program, so I'm not privy to any of the details about it. But what I can tell you, and this is on the website for the program as well, there's going to be 3 different competitions. So there's a $14 billion National Clean Investment Fund and a $6 billion Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. So those are basically both going to set up kind of fund the funder type approaches. So those are going to go to a smaller number of nonprofits or other groups that will then reinvest and work, either kind of set up like a green bank or an investment fund, or set up other ways to work with community groups and CFDIs and those kinds of things to fund action across the country. And then there's the $7 billion Solar for All competition, and that one is aimed at states and municipalities. And more details about that will be coming out this summer, but the idea is to really get a massive investment into solar energy. Next slide, please. And then the environmental and climate justice grants, as I mentioned, they're kind of dividing their money up across a number of different programs. So you can see the TIC-TACs, those are technical assistance centers that were set up. They just announced who was selected, and those are in the process of being awarded, and they should be up and running later this year. They also have a grant maker fund where they're going to set up different funding organizations who will then do small grants to sub-grantees. We have the Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem Solving Grants, the Environmental Justice Government to Government Grants, and then these new grants, which are the Environmental and Climate Justice Change Grants, and there's going to be multiple rounds of those. As you can see on this chart, the first round should be announced at the later this year, and then the second round would be in fiscal year 2025. And then there's going to be some technical assistance for evaluation and reporting. So a number of different programs, a really exciting opportunity to see EPA investing in environmental and climate justice through this program. Next slide. And then the last program I wanted to touch on is the one I know the best. This is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants. As I said before, it's a two-phase program. So the first phase, the planning grants, are to really work on developing strong climate pollution reduction strategies. So that's $250 million that's going towards planning, which is really awesome, but pales in comparison to the $4.6 billion that's going to go towards implementation grants. The planning grants were awarded non-competitively. I will show a slide in a moment that shows what's happening with that in California, but the implementation grant phase will be competitive. So that will be an opportunity. Even if you didn't directly get a planning grant, there may be opportunities to still be eligible for those competitive implementation grants. Next slide. So the requirement that we wrote into the planning grant phase, so there was direct funding for states. All the states were eligible. California did opt into the program, so they are participating. There is a requirement for the state to collaborate with air pollution control agencies and municipalities within the state to develop what we're calling a priority climate action plan. So that's the first thing they have to do, and that is the precursor to that implementation grant competition I talked about. So they need to include in that state plan measures that can be implemented by those collaborating entities like municipalities and air pollution control agencies and tribes. And if those measures are included in the state plan, municipality can apply for implementation funding for that measure that's listed in the state plan. So we are really encouraging you all to work with the state. The state is required to work with you. So we're going to be looking to them to do that, but there's some things that you can do to make sure that process goes a little more smoothly. So I would say be proactive, reach out to your state contacts to learn more about what they're intending to do to actually do this coordination. Keep your eye on the state website or on newsletters, wherever California usually announces these kind of opportunities, make sure you're aware of anything that's coming up. And I really think it's important to be a unified voice to the extent that you can. I think it's awesome that networks like this exist where you all get together and talk to each other, and you can kind of, if you can go to the state with having already identified what your priorities are and that kind of thing, it makes it a lot easier for the state to work with you and to make sure your voice becomes part of that process. And I know that many of you already have municipal climate or energy or sustainability plans. And again, California's probably a little ahead of the curve compared to some of the other states we're working with and some of the other cities we're working with. So because you all have done this great work, it's a really good foundation to build on. And I think the work that you all have done should be represented in that state plan. So we just really encourage you to work with the state on that. Next slide. And then this is just a map of what's happening in California. So as I mentioned, the state has opted into the program. We also awarded funding to 79 metropolitan statistical areas across the US. And you can see the ones for California are listed here. So the funding did not go to a single city. So for example, it didn't go to San Diego. It went to develop a regional plan for the San Diego metro area, which includes, some of the cities and counties around San Diego. You can find a list of who the lead agency for each of these metropolitan areas is on our website. So you can connect with them. If you are part of a metro area and you weren't aware that this is happening, I encourage you to find the lead city or the lead organization for your area and connect with them so you can be part of that planning process. If you are right next to an MSA, but maybe not covered by that MSA, I would also encourage you to reach out. We are not being very strict about narrowing the boundaries of those MSAs. Some MSAs are very open to pulling in neighboring communities. So that might be another avenue for you to consider. And if you're not kind of next to or part of one of these MSAs, that's where you can really look to the state plan as well to make sure that you're covered. Next slide. And then I just wanted to put this up here, many of the resources that are available to help you find some other funding opportunities. I just talked about a couple of the EPA ones, but there's a lot of other ones. So the White House has put together some nice guidebooks on both the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I also wanted to share a link to the grants.gov, which is a federal site where you can put in keywords and find different funding opportunities. As well as EPA's grants office. They have a lot of training and strategies on applying for grants that may be helpful as you think about applying. And I really wanted to highlight, if you are looking to apply for any federal grant, please make sure you have an active and updated account with sam.gov and grants.gov, especially sam.gov. We are hearing it can take a couple months to get those accounts approved. If you do not have one of those accounts, you cannot apply for federal funding. It's a free account. But it gives you a specific number that you need to include in your federal applications. So even if you're not sure if you're going to apply for something in the future, it's really important to go ahead and register and make sure your account is up to date. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit now and just talk about the program that I'm part of at EPA, the State and Local Climate and Energy Program, and just highlight a couple of the tools and technical resources we have. I included some extra resources in the slide deck that I'm probably not going to cover today. Just want to highlight a few of the main ones today, but I'm assuming these slides are going to be distributed and you'll have them. And all of these tools and resources are on our website too, and I'll pop that in the chat once I'm done talking. Okay, so this is kind of an overview of how our program works. So if you think about it as it's not 100% linear process, but if you try and put it in a linear chart, you know, if you think about starting your climate work with inventories and goal setting, we have a number of tools that can help states and cities and tribes with developing a greenhouse gas inventory. Along the bottom, you can see some kind of not tools, but like written resources that can help as you look at your inventory and start to think about, well, how do I move from inventory to action and planning? For local governments, I would primarily highlight the local action framework, as well as the local government climate and energy strategy series. So the strategy series looks at a specific topic and kind of walks you through how to implement it, whereas the framework is not technology specific, but it's more about things like developing an outreach and education program, setting goals, implementing policies or awareness campaigns, those kinds of things that can work for whether it's an energy efficiency campaign or a transportation campaign or a solar program. And then in the middle, we have thinking about designing, comparing, or evaluating policy. And we have a handful of tools there that can help you with that. I'm going to talk about each of those in a little bit more detail. And then finally, we have a number of other resources that can help with communications and policy support. Next slide. So I mentioned we have inventory tools. We have one for states, and then we also have very similar tools with just slightly different interfaces for local and tribal governments. That local tool can work for government operations as well as a community-wide inventory. It does 1 year at a time, but they're Excel-based. They're relatively easy to use, and it's just an alternative for cities to use that's freely available to everybody. I know many cities also use the ICLEI ClearPath tool. They're based on the same underlying protocols. Next slide. And then I did want to just spend a little time on our tools called AVERT and COBRA. So AVERT is the Avoided Emissions and Generation tool. And basically what you can do in here is look at how energy efficiency and renewables and electric vehicles will impact the grid and emissions from electricity. And so basically, if you put in changes in energy consumption or the amount of renewable energy consumed or the amount of electric vehicles you're adding to the system or any combination of those, it will tell you the emissions changes that are going to be associated with those. You can then take the outputs of AVERT and plug them right into our co-benefits risk assessment tool. And it's actually automated that you can, the tools talk to each other and you can do that. And it will convert those emissions changes, primarily the particulate matter changes, into health benefits. And that's done at the county level. So it will give you information about a number of different health-related incidences, as well as the monetized value of those changes. And you can also look at other things in COBRA. It's not just power plant emissions. COBRA can also look at changes in transportation emissions, and basically anything that's in the national emissions inventory, you can put into COBRA as well, and it will do a kind of a screening level air quality analysis. The health benefits per kilowatt hours tool is based on COBRA and AVERT, and basically it just does the work for you and spits out like a dollar value that you can use. So if you are in California and you are doing an energy efficiency program, you can get an estimate of the cents per kilowatt hour health benefits that would be associated with that program. So just cuts out the work of plugging it into those two tools yourself. Next slide. eSyst is one of our newer tools. So this is a tool for looking at energy savings from utility-based energy efficiency programs and how they connect to emissions and public health and equity. And this, you can go back to 2010 or you can look forward out to 2040. And so this is probably aimed more at state level folks, but we are seeing it be used a little bit by local governments and public health officials. Next slide. And then our greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator. This is a really great communications tool. So essentially, if you want to try and explain what greenhouse gas savings are. So if you have come up with a climate plan and you say it's going to save X tons of greenhouse gases, that may not mean a whole lot to the general public when you're talking about it. So this helps turn that into things that people understand, like emissions from a passenger vehicle, or gallons of gasoline, or propane barbecue tanks, things like that. So it's just kind of a fun way to personalize and make what could be a very abstract concept when you're talking about tons of a transparent gas, and make it something that people can visualize. Next slide. And this is the last resource I'm going to talk about, and then we can open it up for questions. But this is another one that we're seeing a lot of interest in. It's our benchmarking and building performance standards policy toolkit. So a lot of state and local governments are starting to implement benchmarking or building performance standards. We've developed a bunch of resources in concert with our Energy Star program at EPA to help state and local decision makers think through what they need to put together a strong policy around building performance. So this is up on our website. It was updated earlier this year. We're seeing the number of these continue to grow across the country. So I think it's a really exciting policy to watch for now on. I'm going to stop there. I want to make sure we leave lots of time for questions, but there are some additional slides with some additional resources, all of which are available on our website, which I'm going to pop in the chat.
Andrea, that was great.
And I see they're on top of it. They've already posted everything in the chat, so never mind.
Well, there's a lot there. So I know that my team needs to go and digest all this and throw all of these things into our resource library so people can easily navigate to them, even if they weren't here. Folks, I think you probably are overwhelmed by the sheer volume of cool stuff you just heard. So, but if you have questions, you can raise your hand or you can throw them in the chat. I have like 5,000 questions. I'm going to start, and whoever has a question is going to chime in.
Great.
I'm wondering, actually, for the audience too, this would be a good time to not just hear your questions, but input as well. I do have one prompt for you, and this is because Andrea's interested. Just what positive experiences have you had with state or federal agencies offering effective assistance for grant preparation? Just what would you recommend the EPA look to when it tries to design their own model? And one of the questions I have, so, just thinking about all of these resources, I wonder if even anybody on the call has taken advantage of any of these resources and would be willing to share how it helped them. I would love to hear that. Like, how has this helped you make progress on some of your climate efforts? And I wondered, Andrea, if, because there's so much there, and sometimes local governments just kind of need, at this point, help getting help because there's too much help. I wonder if there's any just TA, like, can they contact somebody to kind of case manage them to the right tools and help them use it?
Yeah, so that is a great question. My first reaction is, oh, reach out to me and I'll get you to the right person. There's not that many people on this call, so that's probably manageable. And I think my contact information was probably on one of those slides that was flashed up quickly. So I'm happy to help make those connections as a first cut. I would also say that many of the websites do list an email address. Like, some of our tools have like avert@epa.gov. That is a monitored, and we do actually watch those emails. They're not a black box. So if you are going to a website and you see an email like that, that's the best way to connect directly with the support team for a specific tool. So that's a really great start, and that will get answered. So I would start there. If you have a question about a specific tool, and check out the link, see if there's a contact or kind of questions form. For some of our tools, we even have we have different newsletters and things that you can sign up for so that you're informed about trainings and opportunities like that. We also have a newsletter. So I posted the link to our general overview, top level website in the chat. You can get to our newsletter page from there. And if you sign up for our newsletters, you'll also stay up on any trainings or new resources that we put out. I think that's probably the fastest way to stay connected. But I do try to get through all the emails that people send me asking to make those connections.
Well, we'll make sure our team is subscribed to all of those so we can put it in our weekly, and most folks here are subscribed to the weekly, and we can try to download what you need to know, but definitely feel free to subscribe yourself. I like being repeatedly reminded of things. So we have a question here from Kay McKean. Andrea, can you please go back and talk more about the competitive implementation grant for the climate pollution reduction grant? Thank you.
Sure. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of detail I can offer about that quite yet. We are still in the process of developing that program. So we don't have all the answers to exactly how that program is going to work. We do expect, so I'll tell you what I can tell you. And if you have a specific question, you can put that in the chat and I'll try to answer it. But I will say I cannot answer any specifics about how many we're going to do, how large they're going to be, the exact timing of when it's going to happen. I'll give you some general timing. What types of programs or policies will be eligible, that is all still being worked out right now. So we haven't settled on that. We expect to release more information about it. We're targeting kind of the fall timeframe. And then we expect that the actual grant applications will be due sometime in like the first. Well, the priority climate action plans are due March 1st. So it'll be after that, but kind of in the first half of the year will be the actual application deadlines. We don't have the exact date quite yet, but after those priority plans are due, because you have to have a priority plan to apply for the implementation grants. And I just wanted to go over a little bit again, eligibility for those, because I can talk to that a bit. So the broad eligibility for the program was states, municipal governments, air pollution control agencies, tribes, or groups thereof. Whereas groups thereof could be multiple municipalities grouping together to go in for a grant, or it could be a council of governments or a regional planning agency or something like that. It could be eligible under that group of governments kind of clause of that. The way the program is structured, though, the implementation grants have to be to implement plans developed with a planning grant. And how that's just what's written in the statute. So we have to work with that. And the way we've chosen to operationalize that is that you need to be able to point to a priority climate action plan and show how as you apply for implementation funding, you're implementing something that was in a priority climate action plan. We didn't want to limit it. The planning grants were non-competitive. We couldn't give a grant to everybody. So we didn't want to limit the implementation grants though. So the way it is written is that, a state must include a portion of their plan that has measures that could be implemented at the municipal level. They do not need to say X municipality should implement Y measure. They can just say like, here's our, and every state's probably going to handle this a little bit differently, but, they could say, here are our 10 priority measures that we think every municipality in California should implement. So then any municipality in California could look at that list of 10 measures and say, I want to implement, measures 3 and 4 and 7 and put together an implementation grant application for that. Again, I can't speak quite yet as to whether, what measures we're going to fund and how much we're going to fund them for and all of that kind of thing. You will know that well in advance of having to put that application together. I just don't know it today. So the best thing to do to keep yourself eligible and to keep the priorities you want to do in that priority plan are to make sure you're connected with an MSA if that's applicable to you, or with the state. Because if the state, if you really want to do a solar program and the state says, well, we're not going to prioritize solar because we've got a lot of other money for solar, or whatever reason, they're not prioritizing solar, you can't do it if it's not in that PCAP. So I hope that helps. It's a very big, confusing program, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Let's stay on that program for a little while because there's so much to talk about there. And I wanted to appreciate the guidance that you're giving us, sort of the heads up that there's a lot we can do to help influence that program. So, for folks on the line, our team has been engaging with CARB, and it's actually OPR in our state that's taking the lead on the $3 million being allocated to California. There was an initial deadline that already passed, but I think that was a very high level, not even a scope. And so there's opportunity, right? So can you talk a little bit more about how big that window is, like what the timing is for local governments around the state and their partners to be influencing that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, the states had to submit their initial work plan by April 28th. So now we're going through a work plan negotiation phase, but those work plans are very high level. It's essentially just this, it's a way for the state to tell us how they're going to spend the money without a huge amount of detail. It's like, how much are they spending on personnel? And, we expect to do a contract, and spend X amount of dollars to hire someone to do our stakeholder engagement process. But they don't have to have all the bells and whistles and tell us all the details of what that stakeholder engagement process is going to be. So that's what's happening right now with the states. We expect the awards to be made this summer. That's when the states will actually get their money, but they can actually begin work as soon as June 1st in advance of getting their award and still get reimbursed for any work that happens starting June 1st. Now, different states may choose or not, choose to take advantage of that or not, depending on how comfortable they are kind of fronting money for potentially several months till they can get reimbursed. But they do have reimbursable costs back to June 1st. So June 1st is kind of the start date. The Priority Climate Action Plan is due on March 1st. So that is when they're going to, say, we have our plan. These are all the things that are in that Priority Climate Action Plan, and this is what can be used for implementation grant funding. So that is the main window. It's not a huge amount of time. We're talking, I guess that's like 8 months basically of time. My guess is that, and I haven't seen California's work plan, but my guess is they're going to want to do that stakeholder engagement and that municipal collaboration. They're going to want to start that earlier in the process, right? Because you don't necessarily want to wait until you're at the end of your work to start getting input on it. It might not be the very first thing they do, but again, California already has an inventory. They already have a lot of this prep work. So they may be jumping they can kind of springboard ahead. They can skip some of those early steps that other states are starting from ground zero on and have no experience doing. So I would guess that they'll probably be thinking about the municipal piece relatively early on in the process. So I think as early as June, you're going to start seeing that move.
That's really helpful. And I just want to ask the audience, if anybody out there has more intel, if you got the ear to the ground on this one and you know who, which unit with an OPR would be the right to engage, or if you know if some organization is already taking the lead on trying to create this pipeline of communication with local governments, I'd love to hear that. You can contact me directly with that. If we can support, we will, or if we have to try to open up that pipeline of communication ourselves, we can take the lead. So yeah, sounds like now is the time to start having those conversations. Love to hear from anybody. And if any of the MSAs, anybody here who's a lead MSA, I'd love to hear what you guys are working on. If you are talking to each other, if you're talking to the state, I would love to hear from any of the MSAs here that are eligible for those funds, the planning funds. All right, so there's some other questions here in the chat I want to get to. This may be one we take, you may want to take this in the chat, but maybe a quick response. So for Quick Carbon, they're offering electrification and acceleration through automated planning and cost reductions. They're a service provider, they're a for-profit company, and they're suggesting, they're wondering how for-profits can best participate in the programs described today.
Yeah, so I'll just say I don't know that there's a direct way to participate with EPA. We have a lot of rules about that, and not endorsing one company over another, and you're not necessarily an eligible entity. But I think that working, as you see those priorities come out, if there are however you would normally engage with the state or with municipalities, I think you can continue to do that. I would encourage that. I think as you see those plans come out and people are promoting certain measures that fit in with the work that you do, I think reaching out to those places that have indicated interest is really important. So, if an MSA is including something about residential electrification in their priority climate action plan, that might be a good entity to work with. We do have, not so much for the priority climate action plan, but for the longer term planning work. And I talked a lot about what happens in the first 8 months. These are actually 4-year grants, 4-year planning grants. So we're encouraging continued climate planning and more thorough climate planning over the long term. As part of that, we're asking for a workforce analysis. So I think that's that part of the process, and stakeholder engagement around workforce analysis is another really important thing to engage with. We are asking them to include the private sector, to include industry in that kind of stakeholder engagement. So I think looking for opportunities to participate there. I don't know exactly how every state and every MSA is going to choose to approach that, but we know that workforce development is going to be a huge piece of this puzzle. If we're investing, billions of dollars in newer technologies that don't necessarily have a really well trained up workforce for them yet, that's going to be a critical need. So I think that's a really great way to participate.
And a good segue actually to our next question, just coming from Andy Schrader. Last year, this came out, the Biden administration launches the Talent Pipeline Challenge, supporting employer investments in equitable workforce development for infrastructure jobs. Oh, I'm not sure this is under the EPA, but do you have any intel on this?
I do not. I'm sorry. Okay. I have nothing to offer you there.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a question.
Well, I was like, I might want to look into that too. I think that it sounds really interesting, but unfortunately, I do not have any answers there.
I can look into that one and try to bring something back next time, guys. So thanks for that question. Anybody else? Is there any hand raised or any other chats? Folks that wanted to answer the prompt or tell us about their experiences with any of these programs? Just give us another minute or so. Oh, here's somebody. So Aaron in LA, in Los Angeles, LA County will lead the, oh, you're going to lead the CPRG application, but still TBD on which department will lead. I know SCAT. Okay, so the other organizations are involved in the conversations that took place leading up to the deadline. Oh, thank you, Aaron. I might need to follow up with you. Do you want to unmute yourself and say more, or is that at all?
That's the extent of my intel. That is, but if you have advice for folks, I had a ton of folks reaching out to me saying, hey, who's applying? Nobody's like, there's no entity on the list. You guys were sharing spreadsheet saying, here's who's already submitted their letter of intent to participate. And there wasn't anyone for LA for a long time. And so folks were reaching out to me being like, we're doing this, right?
Yeah. I imagine it had to be confusing, right? Like a big area and then just go for it. Somebody take the lead. Yeah, that's
particularly tough. Because it's Orange County and LA County for us. So it's multiple counties. And so there was some uncertainty whether it was appropriate for LA County to lead when it included an additional county.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing some very interesting arrangements in different parts of the country, especially some MSAs cross state lines. So then you're not just dealing with like 2 different counties or 3 different counties, but also looking at, states that might have completely different laws and policies and different utility providers and all kinds of, we just wanted to, we know climate planning super easy. So we just wanted to give you a little extra challenge.
Well, this is something we're definitely going to be focused on more. So stay tuned with us. We're working closely with CARB. And again, this is very related. All these resources are so related to what we've been trying to work on with CARB. And so again, feel free to come and join us for our listening session on May 24th, everybody, where we're going to dive into the barriers of climate action and what state can do to help. And then really we should be folding in all these federal resources are part of the equation too. So Andrea, thank you so much for being here. I feel like we should invite you back sometime. There's a lot to digest here.
Well, I'm happy, if any of these tools sound particularly interesting, I'm happy to, either me or connect you with the right person who can walk you through them in a little more detail. I know I did kind of the fire hose version, but if you want to dig deeper on anything specifically, please let me know.
Yeah, fire hose is how we roll, right, everybody? So you're in good company. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, let's go on to our last couple of slides for the regular session of Learn before we get into our bonus breakout, first one. So, I wanted to answer one question from Nick Freeman from the chat that was really for me. How is Civic Well preparing the Climate Resilience District legislation for upcoming climate efforts? I don't know. I need to go talk to Roger, that's our policy director, and see what they are working on. And I will bring that back for the next round. So thank you for that question. And in fact, a follow-up to what we were just talking about with Andrea, if there was anything you heard today from EPA that you would like to dive in deeper on, either at a Learn or something else, if you want, let's get a demo on one of these tools or something. Tell us. I would love to hear that and make that happen in some way, shape, or form. Another couple of just announcements. So hopefully you all are beginning to register for the SEEK Forum. It's in Santa Rosa, June 13th and 14th. That's like a month away. So we hope you join us. Our theme this year is Investment, Innovation, and Inclusion, Locals Leading a Clean Energy, Climate Stable Future for All. We have a lot of people registering already and a really great lineup of speakers, which all that program is now up for you to view. So please, you can always reach out to us if you need to, but please register. And then, like I said last time, you can contact me directly. I know a lot of folks are really swimming in a lot of information around grants, and I can't write them for you, but I can maybe alleviate a little confusion and try to point you in some right directions based on your needs. So you can contact me anytime for that level of support. All right, so with that, next, what's next for us? So we do have a meeting not in June, because that's our forum. That's literally the same days. So we are not meeting in June, but we hope to see you in person. So our next meeting won't be until July. We are taking your advice, and we're going to be bringing in some grant experts to spend a little bit more time really diving into tips and tricks for how to actually get and take advantage of all of these really great programs that are out. And then, as always, we love for you to invite others. We continue to have a really good showing at these. So you will receive materials after this. You can distribute those to anybody you think would benefit from them, and then invite them to join us. We have over 500 people registered for this series. So we really thank you for continuing to join us. So next up, for those that can stick around for the bonus 15 minutes, we're going to go ahead and transition to that next. And if you have to leave, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.